They say every family has secrets, but the darkest ones are rarely whispered outside the gilded walls of inheritance and reputation. What happens when the illusion of perfect family shatters not because of scandal in the tabloids, but because someone dares to live a life of meaning instead of money? What happens when loyalty to your soul collides with loyalty to your last name? This is not just the story of sacrifice, rebellion, or ambition. This is the story of being forced out of the only home you'd ever known, of hearing the words no child expects to hear from their parents, and of finding out that losing everything might be the very thing that sets you free. Quick reminder, most of you aren't subscribed. If you enjoy this, hit subscribe and like now, then let's get back to the story. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of not living up to expectations, if you've ever sat in silence at a dinner table, knowing that your mere existence disrupts the careful script your family has choreographed, then you will know the ache of this story deep inside your bones. Because sometimes family doesn't fail us by poverty or abandonment, but by the prison of luxury and control. And sometimes, the key to that prison comes disguised as rejection. My name isn't the one you'll find in glossy magazines or corporate newsletters. Not anymore. But once, I was Elise Moreau, 28 years old, middle daughter of the powerful Moreau family of New Haven, Connecticut. For generations, our lives revolved around Moreau Global Holdings, the empire my father built into a multi-billion-dollar development empire. To the outside world, we were polished perfection, a dynasty of power and privilege. But beneath the polished mahogany tables and imported chandeliers, fractures deepened silently with every passing year. I suppose I had a fracture. From childhood, I never quite molded myself into the shape they required. My older brother Adrian fit perfectly, handsome, accomplished, and obedient to the family design. My younger sister Celeste was the socially acceptable rebel whose quirks were art galleries and European travel, not convictions or controversy. They both played their parts with flawless ease. I couldn't. For years, I thought passing the bar exam and beginning my career in law would finally make them proud. As if academic accolades, Harvard degrees, and the letters Escorted beside my name could make me acceptable. But the Moreau family had a blueprint, and diverging from it, no matter how brilliant my detour, was an unforgivable crime. I realized that fully on the night of Adrian's engagement dinner. Growing up, our home was one of those places others would gawk at while walking through the city, a 5-story ivory townhouse that seemed transplanted straight from Paris and rooted near Yale's old campus, with view lines overlooking every historic landmark. Inside, it was a museum, artifacts, sculptures, oil portraits from ancestors who had long ago converted their cunning into wealth. At night, the glass stairwell reflected chandeliers that cost more than some houses, and yet, for all of its grandeur, it never felt like home to me. Only a stage, a place where we played roles we did not write. From birth, the Moreau children were destined: St. Albans Academy, then Harvard Business, then positions within Moreau Holdings. Adrian followed the script with brilliance, and Celeste wandered just close enough to the boundaries to remain charming. But me? From the start, I wanted to understand why. Why did our foundation matter more than the foundations of strangers' crumbling houses? Why did we attend galas for charities that we mocked behind closed doors? And why, when I found light in the law, the power to defend those who had no one else, why was my calling treated not with pride, but shame? By the age of 16, volunteering at a legal aid clinic had given me purpose. By the age of 22, I had waged a silent war of dinner table debates with my father, his voice booming against mine, his face turning crimson at my refusal to back down. My mother had perfected a subtler kind of cruelty, the kind that dripped disappointment like poison, always styled in sighs and cutting remarks said with elegance. And yet, even as I endured the gauntlet of judgment, I hoped that if I achieved enough, if I pushed far enough, they might accept who I was. The night I passed the exam, my hopes reignited. That hope lasted less than 24 hours. I called my mother, elated, asking if she'd add my achievement to our family's quarterly newsletter, a glossy testament of engagements. Expansions and society events sent to 100 influential acquaintances. I wanted, for one fleeting moment, to be seen. Her answer was ice. "Elise," she'd said, in that tone that stripped my name to syllables of disdain. "Passing an exam that thousands pass every year doesn't belong in our updates. Adrian's engagement. That is something worth celebrating. I should have known then. I should have known exactly what awaited me the next evening at our dining table, where silver cutlery gleamed under chandeliers, where engagement to a dynasty-worthy woman mattered more than the calling of my soul, and where dessert would be served with a sentence that shredded the Moreau family script forever. But I didn't. I dressed carefully that night. I wore the navy silk dress that once drew one of my mother's rare compliments. I smoothed my dark hair into the waves she said were acceptable instead of the curls she called unruly, and I clasped on pearl earrings passed down by my grandmother, the only Moreau who had seen me for me. And with those earrings shining against my neck and my naive hope burning within me, I ascended the marble steps to the Moreau townhouse one last time, not knowing that by the end of the evening, I would be escorted out, no longer a daughter but a stranger. The Moreau dining room was a shrine to legacy. A chandelier, prismatic and unforgiving, poured golden light over a mahogany table long enough to host senators. Every detail of that room was curated for impression, not intimacy. The Waterford crystal caught the light like sharpened blades, and at the center, towering arrangements of white lilies perfumed the air so heavily that breathing felt rehearsed. Mother called it presentation. I always thought of it as suffocation. When I arrived, they were already gathered. Adrian stood near the fireplace, arm draped around his fiancée, Sabine Laurent. She was exactly the kind of woman my parents imagined for him. Tall, blonde, perfectly poised, her dress chosen like a chess move. Sabine wasn't just a partner. She was an alliance. Her father owned Laurent Shipping, a global fleet poised to carry Moreau holdings overseas. Every conversation between our families spoke less of romance and more of expansion. Celeste, my younger sister, was at the table, draped in disinterest, scrolling her phone. That was her art form, watching everything without ever letting anyone know she was watching. "Good of you to join us." "Elise," my father said without looking at me, eyes flicking instead at his sleek Patek Philippe watch. In the Moreau household, punctual meant at least 15 minutes early. My mother, immaculate as ever, pressed her cheek to mine gently, careful not to mar her lipstick. "You could have done something more with your hair," she whispered as if the strands were a personal betrayal. I forced myself to smile at Sabine. "Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you," she purred, with that tone of subtle superiority reserved for women groomed to be dynastic wives. "Adrian has told me so much about your unique career choices." The pause on unique cut deeper than if she had sneered outright. In our orbit, unique was code for pitiful. A Moreau who traded boardrooms for legal aid clinics was as alien as a priestess at a stock exchange. Dinner was served, lobster bisque, delicate and decadent. Wilson, our butler of 30 years, carried out the courses with the same quiet dignity he had when I was a child sneaking cookies in the kitchen. He was one of the few human anchors in that mausoleum of perfection. We placed ourselves according to tradition. Father at the head, mother at the far end, Adrian and Sabine to one side, Celeste and I across from them. "Tell Elise about the proposal," Mother prompted, her voice light, scripted, as though she had already drafted the dialogue. "She loves romance." Romance? My parents and I had never once spoken of hearts or feelings, only mergers, futures, appearances. But Adrian, perfect Adrian, launched into his performance anyway. The story unfurled like an opera, a Mediterranean yacht, a private violinist flown from Vienna, a Michelin-starred chef. Sabine glowed as if this tale weren't a carefully staged corporate announcement, but a love story birthed in spontaneity. I murmured, "That sounds beautiful. I'm happy for you both." Father's eyes flicked at me sharply, disappointment crossing his face for half a second. He had expected protest, some spark of dissent he could ignite into public shaming. My calmness denied his scene. The next course arrived, duck breast with cherry reduction, arranged like art too pretty to eat. I felt the moment build like static in the air, pressure closing in. If I didn't speak now, my voice would never be mine again. So I spoke. "I passed the bar," I said simply during a lull between wedding discussions. My voice carried farther than I anticipated. Even the serving staff paused. "I wanted to thank you both for funding my education, even though it wasn't the path you envisioned." Silence slid down the table. Mother sipped her wine, eyes cool. Father cut his meat with precise movements, every slice of the knife a measure of restrained rage. Finally, he spoke. "Passing an exam is nothing to parade," he said. "Especially not tonight when we're celebrating your brother's future." Then, after a weighted pause, "Have you reconsidered my offer to join Moreau Holdings here in New Haven? We have an opening in the legal department." I took a breath. The moment that would split my life had come. "Actually, I've accepted a position with the Haven Legal Collective. They focus on housing, domestic violence, immigration support. The same organization I first volunteered with in high school." The knives in his hand clattered, softly but deliberately, as he set them down. "The clinic? That charity operation? It's one of the most respected public interest law groups in the state," I said, my chest tight with both fear and clarity. "It matters. They help people who have no one else." Adrian cleared his throat, color rising under his collar. Sabine lowered her eyes. Celeste watched with sharp attention, her lips pressed into a line. Mother leaned forward, her voice slow, deliberate, dangerous. "Elise, we allowed your little phase of rebellion because we believed eventually you'd see sense. We paid for Harvard, for Yale, for every door that opened before you. And this is how you repay us? By standing in front of your brother's engagement and proclaiming loyalty to those people?" I swallowed hard. "Those people are citizens. They deserve justice like anyone else. This is how I use what I've been given." Father choked back a laugh, sharp, bitter. "Justice? The only thing you're doing is humiliating this family. Do you even grasp what it means when your name is reduced to charity work and criminal defense? We give you the world and you trade it for scraps?" Something cracked inside me. Something that had been straining for years finally snapped free. "I never asked for the world," I said. "Not your version of it. I never asked to be part of a family that values money more than people." It was as though the table itself fractured. Forks froze midair. Sabine's face blanched. Even Wilson, still standing by the sideboard, did not move. Father's chair scraped as he stood, his face purpling with restrained fury. His napkin slid to the floor like a discarded truce. His words fell like cold steel. "If that is how you feel, then you will not remain a Moreau. If you take this path, Elise, you are no longer welcome here. You are not family." Across from him, Mother said nothing. Her silence was a knife sharper than his rage. Adrian, flawless Adrian, bowed his head toward his plate. Celeste locked eyes with me. Hers brimmed not with scorn, but with a shadow of something else. Maybe fear. Maybe recognition. "Father, you can't—" The words sprang from me half sobbing, half shaking. "Wilson," Father interrupted coldly, "please escort my former daughter out. Her apartment keys are on the hall table. And see that she collects them tonight. She will find her accounts inaccessible as of today." Wilson stepped forward, his weathered face tight with sorrow. The man who had bandaged my knees when I fell on those marble steps, who had hidden me cookies when I was punished, now stood as my guard to exile. "I'm sorry, Miss Elise," he whispered, his hand light at my back. The walk through the hallway was an eternity. Behind me, dinner resumed, not with a shout, not with tears, but with chilling composure, as if the daughter of the house had never existed. The door clicked behind me. The lock turned, and there I stood, under the spring night sky of New Haven, pearls cold against my skin, a key in my hand suddenly rendered useless. The home that had been both prison and palace had, with one sentence, become neither. That night was the longest of my life. The hours after my exile blurred into silence and shadows. I hailed a cab back to my apartment in Cambridge, the luxury two-bedroom my parents had once insisted on. Floor-to-ceiling glass, concierge service, security cameras, everything purchased under the guise of safety, though truthfully it was another way to control me. Now, standing in its echoing lobby, the doorman's polite nod stabbed deeper than I expected. Did he know already? Did everyone? Inside, I sank onto a sleek white sofa that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. My reflection in the tall windows seemed like a ghost, a woman severed from her name, her future unwritten. The shock kept me from crying at first. It was absurd, impossible. They couldn't mean it. Families fought. Families forgave. But disownment? That didn't happen in real life, not in our world. And yet here I was staring at the proof. By midnight, the proof became unarguable. The first text came from Celeste. Elise, are you okay? Her voice was hushed when I called her back, whispering like a guilty child. I imagined her hiding somewhere in the mansion, avoiding our father's wrath. What do you think? My own voice cracked on the edge of disbelief. He banished me, Cel. It's insane. She cut me off fiercely. I can't believe they did this. Father had Wilson change all the locks. Even the gate code. Tonight. The words lodged deep in my chest like splinters. A lifetime of memories, gone with a key code. I swallowed hard. Did you or Adrian say anything? The pause was the answer. Eventually, her voice slipped through. Adrian said, You brought it on yourself. Of course he did. Father's soldier to the end. I tried to defend you, she rushed to add. But Father, he threatened to do the same to me if I didn't stop. The betrayal wasn't hers. I couldn't hold it against her. Celeste was still tethered financially, still at home, and I knew too well what happens when you cross him. There's more, she whispered, her voice breaking even as she forced it out. He called the financial advisor after dinner. He froze your accounts, credit cards, savings, everything. My blood ran cold. When I checked later, the truth hit like physical blows. My checking account, once holding $5,000, reduced, due zero. My savings, over $15,000 from carefully budgeted stipends, emptied. My credit card declined without hesitation when I tried ordering food. In the space of an evening, I was stripped not only of family but of safety. Every lifeline severed, every rope yanked from my grasp. By morning, the hammer fell harder. An email from my landlord sat waiting like a time bomb. Effective immediately, without the Moreau guarantee, we will require either a guarantor or advance payments. You have 30 days to vacate, 30 days. My home was only mine for a month. I called the Haven Legal Collective, voice shaking, explaining my crisis, asking if I could start early. The office manager was kind, sympathetic. If it were up to me, we'd bring you in today, she said. But the nonprofit lived by grant cycles and strict payroll. My position wouldn't begin for 3 weeks. 3 long weeks, and even then, a modest salary that barely skimmed survival in the city. That afternoon, I called every contact I had. The friends from law school whose parents sat on boards with mine, who once invited me to rooftop parties and Hamptons weekends, listened with polite shock before backpedaling into excuses. I'm so sorry, Elise, I wish I could help, but... There was always a but. 6 friends. 6 polite refusals, except Jasmine. She wasn't cut from our gilded cloth. The daughter of a middle-class nurse and a factory foreman, she had clawed her way through law school with night jobs and determination. She understood survival. Crash here, she said without hesitation. The couch isn't glamorous, but it's yours. Pay me back in groceries, not rent. The shame nearly strangled me. I can't pay you anything right now. Elise, she said, her voice steady, kind. Everyone needs help at some point. You're no exception. And so I went. Her place in Somerville was a different universe. Small, cramped, with floors that creaked and appliances 2 decades old. A third roommate's laughter spilled from the kitchen. Dishes clinked in the sink. It was far from flawless perfection, but it was alive. That first night, sitting on her mismatched couch under a crocheted blanket, something shifted inside me. The grief still ached like a broken rib, but beneath it, a thread of light unfurled. This was not marble floors or endless family dinners under crystal chandeliers. This was human. Real. In the days that followed, survival became my curriculum. I pawned my grandmother's necklace, a matching set with the earrings I'd worn to my exile dinner. The jeweler offered $800, a fraction of its worth. I handed it over anyway, his words a salve I didn't expect. Come back in 90 days. We'll hold it for you. I clutched the receipt as though it were a lifeline. I sold furniture online, sleek designs once chosen to reassure my mother of my taste. Gone. In their place, cash flowed into crumpled bills in my hands. I discovered the public library's free internet, a lifeline while job hunting. I learned that grocery stores had brands cheaper than the glossy imports I'd grown up with. I found restaurants that tossed late-night food into trash bags, still fresh enough for hungry strangers to claim, and I learned what it meant to share. To cook a pot of pasta for 3 people, not one. To laugh with Jasmine and her roommates over games instead of glancing nervously at the doors of a gala. In my family's eyes, I had lost everything. From where I now sat on this couch, my legs tangled in a mismatched quilt, I wondered if I'd lost nothing at all. Maybe I had simply begun. Still, nights were hardest. I would curl against the couch and sob silently, grief swallowing me whole. For even if I hated my parents' world, I had loved them. I had tried, year after year, to bend myself enough to matter. And now, I had not only been cast out, but dismantled like a financial liability. Yet, through the breaking, through the desperation, through the loss, something else grew. Resilience. A fragile seed stretching upward in the dirt. Because a week later, when my phone buzzed with an urgent email from George Caldwell, my father's longtime attorney, I thought it was another blow. Instead, it was the edge of a revelation that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my grandmother, and myself. The email arrived like a crack of thunder on a clear sky. Subject: urgent. Please call immediately. Signed with the name I had known since childhood, George Caldwell. My father's attorney. His shadow at every boardroom, every estate signing, every family will. At first I thought it was a trick. Another means to control me. Fear clenched my stomach, conjuring endless possibilities. Maybe they wanted to block my job offer. Maybe sue me for breach of some twisted obligation they'd invented. Their reach was long enough to make any threat possible. I showed Jasmine. She frowned, lips tight. Why would your father's lawyer reach out now if they've cut you off completely? It smells strange. George isn't cruel, I murmured. Just bound. Bound to them. My grandmother trusted him, though. He always treated me decently, at least compared to the rest. After an hour of pacing, I pressed the call button. This is Elise Moreau. Calling for Mr. Caldwell. Moments later, his familiar voice slipped through the line. But it was tired, worn, not the crisp tone I remembered. Elise, George said immediately. Thank you for calling. I need to see you. This is not a conversation for phone lines. Why? My suspicion burned through my words. You're their lawyer, George. Not mine. This concerns you, he pressed. And it is. Delicate, delicate. A word men like George never used. My heart raced, but curiosity outweighed fear. We agreed to meet the next morning at a small coffee house on Chapel Street near the Green. Neutral territory. Public. Safe. I sat by the window early, every nerve pulled taut. When George walked in, I barely recognized him. His once impeccably groomed frame seemed heavier, his hair thinner, his eyes lined with exhaustion. He wasn't simply aged, he was burdened. Elise. He slid into the chair. His voice was softer now, the formality stripped away. What is this about, George? I folded my arms, guard up. He glanced around the cafe, lowered his voice. Do you remember the trust your grandmother, Margaret Rose Moreau, established before she passed? I frowned. I was 16 when she died. I remember she left us money. But Father said mine was used for school. Adrian got his at 25. Celeste's comes next year. That's all I was told. Pain crossed his face. He inhaled slowly. That's not quite true. Each of you received a separate trust. Adrian's was distributed at 25, as stipulated. Celeste's is held until her 25th birthday. Yours was different. Your grandmother made it so. Confusion tightened inside me. Different how? George looked me in the eye. Elise, she wrote your terms so you would access your trust either at age 30 or immediately upon the completion of postgraduate studies. And you, my dear, passed the bar. That fulfills the condition. It hit like a shockwave. My throat was dry. Then, where is it? His shoulders sagged. Sitting in accounts. Invested, grown, currently valued at around $2.3 million. The world tilted, the cafe spinning. 2 million? Yes, he confirmed. It was always there, for you. Your grandmother worded it carefully. She knew the family dynamic. She wanted to protect you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then words tumbled from me, raw. And my parents hid this? They lied to me. Told me it was gone. That it paid for school. His silence was answer enough. They've been misusing it, he admitted softly. Borrowing against it just enough to fuel the business, to cover debt lines. Things your grandmother explicitly forbade when she drafted the terms. When you fulfilled your conditions weeks ago, I advised your father that, legally, the trust must transfer to you immediately. He objected. He tried to persuade me to reinterpret the language, to delay, to find loopholes. My nails dug into my palms beneath the table. That's illegal, isn't it? It's a breach of fiduciary responsibility, George confirmed. At best, at worst. Fraud. You've been their lawyer for years, I accused, my voice trembling with betrayal. Why are you telling me now? He leaned closer, his face lined with gravity. Because when I reviewed the documents again, it went beyond what I could keep quiet. Elise, if you hired any trust attorney, you'd win everything. And I will not be complicit in this anymore. It felt like my insides were splitting open. I had lived for 28 years believing my family resented me because of who I was, because I chose meaning instead of money. But now it was worse. They weren't just ashamed of me. They had actively stolen from me. Hidden what my grandmother intended me to have, a gift of independence, of freedom, while pretending generosity in the form of paying my tuition. All the while, they leashed their daughter with chains of wealth that had never been theirs to hold. I stared into my coffee cup, the world a blur. What now? They want to meet, George said heavily. Your parents. They've requested a sit-down at my office. Tomorrow afternoon. But Elise, this time you're not powerless. You hold all leverage. They know it. That's why this meeting exists. They are panicking, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from the number I had sworn I would never see again. Darling, we need to talk. Your father was upset and said things he didn't mean. Family is everything to us. Come home. Mother. For a long moment, I just stared at the glowing screen. After George left, I sat in that cafe alone, trembling. My grandmother's pearls brushed against my neck, a reminder of the only Moreau who had seen me clearly. Did she know it would come to this? Is that why she carved me a lifeline, hidden deep in fine legal language? Did she see my father's shadow long before I did? I thought of every burned bridge, every withheld hug, every sigh of disappointment through my mother's painted lips. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pleading for their approval. I wasn't begging for scraps of acceptance. This time, they wanted something from me, and that changed everything. The next day, standing in front of the mirrored elevator doors of Caldwell and Associates, I felt like I was walking into the lion's den, only this time I wasn't alone. Beside me was Susan Kane, one of my former professor's recommendations, a seasoned trust and estates litigator with a reputation for razor-sharp courtroom precision. Where George Caldwell had spent decades bound to my father's will, Susan represented something radically new: independence. Loyalty to me. Remember, she murmured as the elevator hummed upward, we're not storming a fortress. We're not here to fight unless necessary. But we will not be pushed. If they try to box you in, I'll cut the walls open. I nodded, hands tightening around my leather folder. I was terrified. But beneath the terror, a strange calm had rooted itself. This time, at last, I had leverage. The receptionist's face flickered with surprise as we entered. I knew she recognized me from childhood. Those years I'd trailed behind my father into this very office, always told to sit quietly at the polished conference table and observe how real business works. Back then, I had been a decorative extension of the Moreau name. Today, I walked in as Elise Moreau, attorney at law, accompanied by my own counsel. The conference room was just as I remembered. Glass walls revealing the sweep of New Haven green, bookshelves lined with law tomes that smelled faintly of dust and reverence, the heavy polished table set like an altar, and there they were. My father sat rigid at the head of the table, his bespoke suit as immaculate as ever, but the tension in his jaw visible even from the doorway. My mother sat beside him, pearls gleaming, her face a perfect mask of maternal poise. George Caldwell sat still further down, expression tight, papers arrayed neatly before him. Their faces shifted when they saw Susan. A ripple of disapproval crossed my father's features. My mother's smile faltered. For them, this was a betrayal, bringing an outsider into family matters. Elise, my mother rose with arms opened as though to embrace me. "Darling, how wonderful! Who is this?" I stepped back from her approach, my own voice steady. "This is Susan Kane, my attorney. She's here to represent my interests." My father's face hardened instantly, his familiar shade of crimson climbing. "There's no need for outside counsel." "This is family business," I met his eyes squarely. "You made it very clear that I wasn't family. Susan stays." And just like that, the illusion of reconciliation cracked. George cleared his throat, perhaps to redirect. "Now that everyone is here, let us review." The trust in question was established by Margaret Rose Moreau. The stipulation, access upon age 30 or completion of postgraduate studies, whichever occurs first. Elise has completed law school and passed the bar. By those terms, she is entitled to immediate control of the trust, valued at approximately $2.3 million. My father leaned back, his voice smooth, false warmth coating the words like oil. "Before we speak of transfers, I think we all agree family unity is paramount. Elise, your mother and I have reflected on the incident at dinner. We're willing to move past that unpleasantness. Come home. Let us restore harmony." The words sounded rehearsed, almost theatrical. And yet not once did he say he was sorry. Not once did he admit fault. "And in return?" I asked quietly. "What do you expect me to sign away this time?" Mother's smile stiffened. Father didn't smirk, not openly, but triumph glinted in his tone as he gestured. George reluctantly slid a document across the table. Susan's sharp eyes scanned it. Her brow arched. "This agreement," she said crisply, "would indeed release the trust, but it simultaneously assigns management of all assets to Moreau Global Holdings. Elise would receive an annual stipend, while forfeiting actual authority. In layman's terms, your client keeps control. That directly violates the trust language." Father spread his hands in falsely reasonable appeal. A win-win. Elise gains financial stability. The trust remains aligned with the family portfolio. Everyone benefits, heat surged inside me. I saw them as I had never truly allowed myself to before. Not as disappointed parents, but as strategists. As predators cloaked in silk. They were not offering reconciliation. They were rewriting the contract of ownership that tied me to their dynasty, disguised in paternal language. A memory of my grandmother surfaced like a candle in the dark. Me at 12, sitting at her side with a story I wrote for school. My parents dismissed it outright. Unrealistic, impractical. But she had taken my face in her hands and whispered, "You have a gift, my girl. A gift for seeing truth? Don't let them bury it, not even family." I understood now why she had written my trust differently. She had known. She had given me a way out. I pushed the papers back across the table, the gesture firm. "The answer is no." My father's eyes widened slightly, as though he'd expected negotiation, a timid concession. Instead, my refusal landed sharp in the silence. He leaned forward, scowl darkening. I don't think you comprehend what's at stake here. Without this alignment, you isolate yourself from the family. Permanently. I held his gaze evenly. You isolated me when you disowned me. All this is business. Mother's voice tightened like a string about to snap. Darling, we're offering you a place in the family again. Don't throw that away. Susan slid another folder across the table. Mr. Moreau, Mrs. Moreau, my client appreciates your sentiment, but unless complete and immediate distribution of her trust is made, we are prepared to file with probate court. I also recommend we prepare to demonstrate each unauthorized loan taken from this trust account, which would constitute breach of fiduciary duty. The mask shattered on my father's face. Rage boiled through the cracks. Absurd! Every move was for the benefit of this family's legacy. But George, pale and heavy, shook his head. James, the terms were explicit. Margaret forbade collateralization or borrowing. She wanted Elise's independence protected. My father turned toward me, his voice low and dangerous. If you take this adversarially, you will never work in this city again. Everywhere you turn, doors will close. That clinic you're clinging to? One call and it evaporates. The threat landed like a knife, but I didn't bleed. Not this time. I lifted my chin. Maybe I won't work in your city. Maybe I'll work in the real one. What you're doing isn't just ruthless. It's illegal. And if you press me further, I'll make sure everyone knows it, including the Massachusetts Bar Association. His fists slammed the table, rattling crystal glasses, and then, abruptly the door opened. It was Adrian, my brother, immaculate as ever, and Celeste, her eyes wide, torn between fear and defiance. Elise, Adrian started smoothly, that practiced tone of calm authority he'd cultivated since childhood. You're taking this too far. We're family. We don't drag lawyers into this. We work it out together. For once, Celeste said nothing, but her gaze met mine, steady. I looked back at all of them, my father red-faced and seething, my mother perfectly composed behind cold pearls, my brother posturing with reason, my sister cracking silently at the seams. And suddenly, I wasn't a desperate daughter at their mercy. I was the truth my grandmother had seen, standing upright at last. I'm not the one who took it too far, I said, my voice steady as stone. You disowned me. You stole from me. And now that you're caught, you expect loyalty from the same daughter you cut loose? No, not anymore. I choose me. My life, my values. If that's the cost of losing the Moreau name, then so be it. I gathered my folder, Susan rising beside me. This conversation is over. Transfer the trust to its rightful owner, or face court. My father thundered after me, his voice echoing off the glass. Without us, you are nothing. I turned at the door, looked at him one final time. No, father. Without you, I'm finally something. And I walked away. The following week passed in a blur of signatures, filings, and late-night emails with Susan. When the final documents arrived confirming the transfer, I stared at the figures in disbelief. The trust, my trust, was finally mine. My parents' grasp had been pried away by the one woman who had believed in me when no one else would. My grandmother. The number was staggering, $2.3 million. It didn't even feel real. For 28 years, they had made me believe that everything I had was borrowed, conditional, theirs to revoke at will. Now in black and white, I saw proof that I wasn't just surviving anymore. For the first time in my life, I was untethered. Susan advised me wisely. Don't do anything drastic. Don't buy the car or the house right away. Wealth won't heal wounds overnight. Slow down. Learn how to breathe without their hand at your throat. Her words burrowed into me. I had been controlled, criticized, diminished for so long. The space of autonomy made me dizzy. So I didn't rush. I did nothing for the first week except let the revelation sink in. I stayed at Jasmine's a little longer, even after I could have moved out that very night. She and her roommates refused to let me pay them back yet, arguing the comfort of shared meals and laughter had been priceless. And they were right. That mismatched little apartment had been the raft that carried me across the storm. But eventually, I knew I had to step forward. I found a modest one-bedroom in Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood alive with diversity, creativity, and warmth. It was smaller than the walk-in closet of my childhood room, but it was mine. I bought it outright with a sliver of the trust money, not to flaunt, but to ensure no landlord or parent could ever again hold my shelter hostage. On the day I moved in, I stood barefoot in the center of its empty living room. Sunlight streamed in, painting the scratched wooden floor with gold. There was no piano tutor, no portrait of ancestors, no curated art from galleries designed to impress clients. Just 4 blank walls and peace. I cried, not the sobs of despair that had haunted me since that night at the dining room table. These were tears of release. Tears for the girl who had spent her entire life begging to be seen. Standing there, I realized she was free at last. Work began soon after. My official start at the Haven Legal Collective arrived, and I dove in head first. The salary, $45,000 a year, seemed laughably small in comparison to the trust. But I chose to live on my earnings, not my inheritance. The trust would remain untouched except for thoughtful, deliberate choices. My grandmother hadn't left it for new wardrobes or vacations. She had left it for independence, for freedom to live without a leash. And I intended to honor that. My first cases were brutal but purposeful. A woman desperate for a restraining order against an abusive partner. A tenant facing wrongful eviction from a landlord hoping to replace him with higher-paying tenants. A young immigrant facing a maze of bureaucratic cruelty. Each file wasn't just a case, it was a revelation. These were the people left behind by the very type of family I came from. The Moreaus built empires while men and women like my clients struggled for scraps. I remembered every gala where my parents toasted philanthropy with champagne flutes, then sneered at the very people I now defended. The irony was sharp, but I embraced it. Every motion I filed, every courtroom argument I made, felt like reclaiming the piece of myself they had tried to kill. Still, nights remained hard. Alone in my small apartment, I sometimes held the pearl earrings from my grandmother, wondering if I'd ever stop longing for love from people incapable of giving it. Grief lingered, a slow poison that surfaced when the world grew quiet. They were still my parents. My rejection wasn't just financial. It ran to the bone. Weeks passed into months, and new rhythms formed. I joined a community garden near my new neighborhood, my hands for the first time breaking soil not as a symbol, but as sustenance. I volunteered for a youth writing program, remembering Grandma Rose's words about truth. And thanks to Jasmine, I began attending community dinners, potlucks where laughter filled mismatched chairs, far from the sterile silence of Moreau galas. There, unexpectedly, I met people who never once flinched at my name. They didn't care about who I was related to or who I had been rejected by. I remember one evening in particular. A man named Daniel, a history teacher at the local high school, leaned across the table when I told him I was an attorney. Legal aid? That's real work, he said simply, without irony, without hidden disdain, just truth. No one had ever said that to me before. For the first time in my life, I smiled. An unforced, genuine smile not performed for an audience but blossoming from within. But life had more chapters still waiting. 2 months into this new rhythm, my phone rang. The name lit bright across the screen, Celeste. I hadn't heard much from her since the confrontation at George's office. But now her voice, tentative and careful, drifted into my ear. Can we meet? Just the 2 of us, I agreed. A cafe, nothing fancy. Neutral ground. She arrived in designer clothes, her hair styled to perfection, yet her eyes reflected something raw I hadn't seen before. Envy. Longing. Maybe even admiration. So, she glanced around at the cozy, mismatched decor. This is how the other half lives. Most of the world lives this way, I told her softly. Our bubble was the exception, not the rule. For 2 hours, we talked like sisters who had never truly known one another. She admitted envying my courage to stand up, though she confessed she wasn't ready to risk her own fragile independence yet. She confessed that father used my empty chair at dinners as a lesson, reminding them all of what happens when someone dares to stray. Her words tore at me, but they also filled me with an odd hope. Maybe one day she too would step free. When we parted, her grip on my hands lingered longer than expected. "You're braver than you think, Elise," she whispered. And then she was gone, pulled back into the gravity of the family mansion. That night, I walked home beneath the Boston sky, clutching my grandmother's pearls. I thought of her, how she must have foreseen this moment, how she built me a bridge in secret across the abyss my parents created. And I understood something new. The trust was not just money. It was a message that I had been seen, believed in, saved. And if I had been given that chance, maybe my purpose wasn't just to live freely. Maybe it was to extend that bridge to others. In the quiet months that followed Celeste's hesitant cafe confession, I began to understand what healing really looked like. It wasn't sudden, dramatic, or clean. It was slow, patchy, uneven, like a bone reknitting itself after being broken in jagged splinters. Part of me still ached every time I thought of the Moreaus, but another part was growing roots in new soil, stronger and deeper than anything the mansion's marble floors had ever given me. By spring, 3 things had happened almost simultaneously. First, my small team at the Haven Legal Collective began to make meaningful strides in housing justice cases. One breakthrough in particular gained traction: Riverview Apartments v. Watterson Properties, a class action lawsuit defending a community of immigrant tenants being systematically overbilled and threatened with mass eviction. I spearheaded the legal strategy, burning midnight hours over lease agreements, maintenance records, and rent order histories. In court, when the judge ruled in our client's favor, securing not just their housing but damages from the predatory landlord, something shifted in me. The victory was more than just a case won. It was vindication. For the first time, it felt like my chosen path had carved into the wider world, leaving a mark no Moreau dinner table could erase. Second, the Boston Globe published a feature piece on community advocates, and I was one of the profiles. The reporter was gentle, curious, and when she asked about my family background, I answered honestly, but without venom. I didn't need to lie, but I didn't need to drag their names through the mud either. I spoke about choice, about walking away from expectations to pursue meaning, about the courage my grandmother modeled for me, and how her trust had saved my independence. The article was tucked on page 6 of the Metro section, but it pried open a door I hadn't expected. Invitations arrived, to panels, to small conferences, to legal aid fundraisers. Law students came up to me in hallways with questions, eyes wide and hopeful. For the first time, my name wasn't whispered in disgrace in glossy parlors. It was spoken aloud in community centers, libraries, and classrooms. And the third, perhaps the quietest but most important change, came from my grandmother's pearls. I wore them one day at work, small, understated, familiar, and an idea haunted me like a whisper. What if her belief in me wasn't meant to stop at me? What if her gift was supposed to ripple outward? I couldn't shake the thought. Within weeks, I made a decision. With Susan's guidance and careful structuring, I used part of the trust to create the Rose Fellowship, a scholarship for law students pursuing public interest with no family safety net to fall back on. Students who, like me, knew the sting of being told they weren't real lawyers because they chose justice over profit. The fund's principal sat quietly in investments, but each year, a handful of recipients would be freed from their own shackles of tuition debt, given the gift my grandmother had carved out for me. The announcement was small, published only on the collective's website and in a couple of legal aid newsletters, but the letters I received from applicants in the weeks after filled me with a kind of pride no trophy or inheritance had ever managed. Stories of students who had worked 2 or 3 jobs through law school, who were undocumented, who had survived abuse and homelessness, who wanted to give their lives to fighting for others. When I awarded the very first fellowship, $10,000 that meant one young woman could pursue an unpaid summer internship instead of flipping burgers, I cried for a solid hour after the ceremony. For the first time in my life, I understood my grandmother's foresight. It wasn't about freeing me from them. It was about freeing me to give others the same chance. But while my life was stitching itself into something whole, cracks were forming in the Moreau empire. Celeste told me cautiously during one of our monthly coffee meetups. "Father's been furious lately," she whispered, her voice trembling in that genteel cafe. "Without access to your trust to leverage, the company strained. They had to cut 40 positions. He blames you, Elise." The shame in her voice was heavy, but it didn't belong to her. It belonged to him. "It's not my fault if he mismanaged the business." My tone was steady, but inside I still felt guilt. I had never wanted innocent employees to lose their jobs. "He doesn't see it that way," she said. "To him, you abandoned your duty. And Adrian feeds it. He repeats it at every board meeting. Her voice dropped almost to nothing. "You're the cautionary tale." Of course I was. They needed me to be. Every tyrant requires an exile to justify their grip. For all her conflicted loyalty, Celeste confessed something else that day. "Sometimes I wish I had your courage. He still controls me, even in small ways. What I wear, who I can seriously date. If not for my upcoming trust, I'd have nothing of my own." "Then the moment you get it, protect it," I urged. "Let Susan help you structure it so he can't touch it. Do not let history repeat itself." She nodded, but I could see the war waging inside her. It was around this time, 6 months after the disownment, that an invitation arrived in my mailbox. A thick ivory card engraved, bearing the Moreau family crest at the top. "You are invited to the annual Moreau Easter brunch." My jaw actually dropped. I hadn't expected to see my name on any family correspondence again, let alone alongside a note scribbled in my mother's delicate hand. "Family should be together for the holidays." I laughed, bitter, sharp. Holidays in the Moreau house were never about family. They were about optics. Who came, who smiled, what alliances were cemented over lamb and wine. Jasmine, ever my compass, tilted her head when I showed her. "Are you going to go?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to show them they can't break me, that I'm thriving without them. But another part, I don't think walking into that house again would heal anything. It would just reopen wounds. In the end, I declined. Politely but firmly. Easter Sunday, instead of clinking champagne flutes under chandeliers, I helped serve meals at a neighborhood church community kitchen. I ladled soup beside Daniel, shared tables with families who offered me more honest warmth than my parents ever had. When we sat eating afterward, Jasmine raised her plastic cup of lemonade. "To chosen families," she declared. Everyone clinked back, and somehow, that toast meant more than all the crystal glasses of my childhood combined. But fate has a way of forcing confrontations whether you seek them or not. 2 weeks later, walking through the Saturday farmers market, I stumbled against a cart of strawberries and nearly collided with my parents. There they were, in polished white and pastel leisure clothes that screamed country club chic, wandering awkwardly among the earthy stalls of produce and local cheese. For a moment, neither of us moved. "Elise?" My mother's voice was honeyed, but her eyes betrayed her surprise. "What a surprise, seeing you here." "I live here," I said simply, hefting my cloth bag heavy with vegetables. "What brings you two out of the ivory tower?" "Your father's doctor suggested more organic food," she said with a thin smile. "So here we are." The conversation might have ended there. But then, perhaps fate again, a child running past jostled into my mother, her stiletto heels sinking into a puddle. expensive leather stained instantly. I braced for the eruption. But nothing came. Instead, my father caught her arm, steadying her. He didn't scold the parents. He just looked tired. Vulnerable, even. I asked softly, "Are you all right, James?" "It's nothing," he dismissed, though I noticed the faint tremor in his hand. "Minor heart thing. Don't make much of it." For the first time since my exile, his tone carried something that wasn't thunder. It carried age, fragility. "Perhaps," my mother said quickly, eager to smooth the moment. "We should get coffee. There's a place just over there." Against my own instincts, I agreed. The three of us sat together at a cramped cafe table, a far cry from mahogany and chandeliers. The air was awkward, stilted. We talked of neutral topics: weather, Adrian and Sabine's new house, acquaintances' retirements. But beneath it all hummed an undercurrent neither of us could ignore. Finally, Father looked at me with those calculating dark eyes. "You seem, well," coming from him, it was almost a compliment. "I am," I said quietly. "I've built a life here. My work matters." "Yes, we read about your case in the newspaper," Mother added, adjusting her pearls. "It made you sound quite effective, not proud. Not impressed, but something." I sipped my coffee, meeting their gazes steadily. "It's more than just effective. It's meaningful." Silence stretched. I realized in that moment they were testing me, waiting for me to crack, to beg, to offer. But I didn't. I let the silence stand. Eventually, my mother asked almost pleadingly, "Is there no way back? Back to family again?" I set down my cup. "Not back. Never back. That family was built on conditions, control, appearances." I paused, my voice steady. "But forward, perhaps. If you can accept me for who I am, for who I always was." They didn't speak. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't erupt. My mother's eyes flickered with something closer to sorrow than disdain. As I rose to leave, I left them with the one truth I had come to believe above all. You shut your door on me. I will not shut mine. But you'll need to walk through on different terms. I turned and stepped back into the market crowds, the pearls at my ears warm in the sun. And in that walk away, I realized something profound, something my grandmother knew long ago. I was no longer a daughter defined by their approval. I was a woman defining her own legacy. And perhaps one day, even they would learn to see it. By late autumn, almost a full year since the night of my exile from the Moreau table, my life no longer resembled the fragile wreckage it had been in those early weeks on Jasmine's couch. It was something new, something fierce and whole. I had settled into my small Jamaica Plain apartment, its mismatched furniture slowly replaced not with polished designer pieces, but secondhand treasures chosen because they spoke to me. Bright local art adorned my walls, each piece purchased not as an investment, but because it stirred something I felt in my chest. My home finally reflected me. Not the Moreau name, not curated appearances, not my mother's taste. Just me. Work at the Haven Legal Collective had become the heart of my days. The Riverview Apartments case had lit a spark across Massachusetts. Legal aid offices from Worcester to Springfield reached out, asking if they could borrow the arguments we had used. Young lawyers emailed me questions, sometimes even reverent praise, words I still found difficult to accept without disbelief. In our society's cultural hierarchy, Moreau's had always been taught that philanthropy was noble because it was optional. I had chosen the opposite path, not performance but permanence. The letters from tenants saying we can sleep tonight because of you meant more to me than all the Gala speeches of my childhood put together. And there was the Rose Fellowship. By winter, our second round of applications had doubled. Stories poured in from law students who worked overnight security shifts to pay tuition, who balanced parenting against polemics, who turned their own trauma into a weapon for justice. Each file I read resonated. Each recipient named was another ripple from my grandmother's decision to shield me. That scholarship had become not just a tribute to her, but an act of resistance, a torch passed hand to hand, bright enough to illuminate pathways for those not born into chandeliers. But even as my world blossomed in color, the shadow of the Moreau name lingered at the edge of my horizon. It was Celeste who bridged the gap. Our coffees had turned into regular dinners now, always on my side of town, cafes thick with the aroma of cumin and garlic instead of white linen austerity. The first time she sat in my cramped apartment, she looked around with wonder. "You really live like this?" she asked, brushing her fingers across a scuffed bookshelf I had picked up at a neighborhood yard sale. "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "And I love it." To my surprise, Celeste didn't sneer. She laughed, a real laugh, free of the clipped edges we were raised with. "I can't imagine Father walking in here," she admitted, shaking her head. "He'd implode." Exactly why I never invite him. Over these months, Celeste's mask had begun to slide off. She admitted her suffocation, her trust still tied up tightly under Father's thumb until her 25th birthday. She admitted her envy of my independence, and, with a touch of shame, she confessed the truth of every Moreau dinner I'd missed since leaving. "Your empty chair," she whispered one night, gaze fixed firmly on her coffee cup, "is Father's lesson now. He points to it and tells us what happens when we defy him. That you became nothing," her voice cracked. "But Elise, you've become everything." I reached across the table, squeezed her hand. She was still trapped, by finances, by fear, by loyalty twisted into chains. But the spark was there. The same spark Grandma Rose saw in me. If one day Celeste chose to walk through the fire, I hoped she would find me waiting on the other side. I was still thinking of her words a week later when the invitation arrived. This one wasn't from my parents. It was gilded. Embossed, addressed to me directly. "The Massachusetts Legal Aid Foundation Gala cordially invites you to be our honored guest." Me, honored guest. Not as Elise Moreau, daughter of Moreau Global Holdings, but as Elise Moreau, staff attorney, advocate, fellowship founder. For a moment, I simply stared at the card, unable to process the reversal, and then realization struck like ice. My parents would be there. The Moreaus never missed high-profile fundraisers, especially when mingling with social elites presented business opportunities. The gala was one of Boston's crown jewels in the social calendar, second only to hospital balls and state dinners. I knew what it meant, our two worlds, colliding in public. Still, I accepted. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black gown I had bought secondhand, tailored, elegant, but understated. Around my neck, glimmering softly, sat my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one I had reclaimed after pawning it in desperation all those months ago. With her pearls shining against my skin, I felt armored. The ballroom glittered as expected, crystal chandeliers, hushed violins, tables rimmed with silver. Women in gowns the size of mortgages paraded. Men in tuxedos shook hands that smelled of old wealth. I felt nerves tighten in me at first, an echo of walking into Moreau dinner parties as a teenager, always measured, always failing to meet some impossible ideal. But then a young attorney from Worcester approached me, his eyes wide. "You're Elise Moreau, aren't you? Your Riverview case, it's brilliant. We're using it as a template for our own litigation. You've changed lives." The pride that swelled inside me wasn't performative. It was real. The kind of pride that couldn't be stripped by silence at a family table. I was speaking with him when I felt it. That familiar, suffocating presence, the air shifting around me. When I turned, I saw them. My parents, my mother, pristine in navy satin, her pearls gleaming like armor. My father, stern and sculpted in his bespoke tuxedo, his eyes appraising me the way an investor appraises risks. "Elise," my mother said with a smile so practiced it hurt to look at. She leaned in with an air kiss that stopped just shy of my cheek. "How lovely to see you." Father inclined his head stiffly. "You look well," I forced a steady smile. "I am well, thank you." The law student excused himself, sensing the tension. For a moment, the three of us stood among the glittering crowd, a tableau frozen in time. Yes, we read about your case, Father said, his tone carrying the barest tinge of forced civility. The Riverview matters. I hope you're being careful not to antagonize too many of the real estate community. They have long memories. I didn't flinch. I'm representing people who deserve justice. That is all that matters to me. Disappointment flickered across his face, the same look I'd seen for years whenever I failed to wear the right dress or choose the right internship. Only now it washed over me like rain on stone. He shook his head. You still can't see the bigger picture. Always missing the forest for the trees. No, I replied quietly. I see the forest clearly. It's just not one I care to profit from. Before he could retort, another attorney, a woman from Rhode Island, slid in, beaming. Ms. Moreau, I had to tell you, your strategy with the Riverview leases, it's groundbreaking. You've given us a model we've needed for years. Her praise, spoken right in front of my parents, landed like a revelation. I saw the shift in their faces, my father's frustration sharp, my mother's expression brittle. For them, my worth had always been externalized, measured by their validation, their power. Now strangers, peers, praised me for my work beyond their control. I'm so glad it's helped, I told her, genuinely moved. She squeezed my arm before drifting away. My mother was the one to end it. She touched my father's sleeve with queenly poise. The Lawrence are expecting us, James. We mustn't keep them waiting. They turned to go, but not before Father paused. His voice low, clipped. The business is struggling. Without the trust leverage, Adrian is stretched thin. We could use your cooperation. For a heartbeat, I was stunned. It was as close to an admission of weakness as I'd ever heard pass his lips. I'm sorry to hear about the difficulty, I said softly. But my trust was never a family slush fund. It was my grandmother's gift to me. Not to Moreau Holdings, his jaw tightened. His eyes burned. Still, I didn't look away. Mother tugged at his arm again, and they vanished, swallowed by sequined gowns and polished shoes. But inside me, something seismic shifted. For the first time in my life, I realized with full clarity, I did not need them anymore. Their voices no longer dictated my destiny. Their approval no longer held the weight of survival. My father's parting words echoed, bitter and desperate. But they did not wound me. If anything, they revealed what I had become in his world. No longer disappointment, but threat. And strangely enough, I smiled, because I'd rather be their threat than their prisoner. By winter's first snow, it had been nearly a year since I walked out of George Caldwell's office and chose my own name over the weight of the Moreau Empire. Nearly 12 months since pearls in my ears gave me the courage to rise from the dinner table and stop begging for approval. I had expected the ache of rejection to diminish with time. What I hadn't expected was how it would transmute, transforming into something far stronger and, at times, sharper. It no longer immobilized me. It propelled me. Every case I won at Haven Legal, every tenant I defended, every survivor I helped secure legal protection, each victory whispered to the girl who was told she wasn't enough. See? You are enough. More than enough. But life was no longer just about survival and scraping dignity out from under my parents' shadows. Slowly, something greater was taking shape. A real community, real relationships, and even the possibility of love. My apartment in Jamaica Plain had evolved from a starter refuge into something more alive, more vibrant with each passing season. Plants sprawled across the windowsills, filling the room with green life, sunlight bathing them in radiant warmth. The mismatched second-hand furniture slowly found harmony under my careful touch. Thrifted rugs layered against the wooden floors, friends' paintings swapped for dinners, shelves filled not with cold glass vases but with books I actually read. Here, I hosted simple dinners, big bowls of pasta, bread from the bakery down the street, cheap wine drunk from mismatched glasses. Jasmine was at many of them, along with her roommates, other young attorneys, teachers, artists, neighbors. These nights were chaotic, full of laughter that rose into the warm air and lingered like comfort. I began to think, maybe this was what family looks like. One not crafted by last names or old money addresses, but by choice, by love, by presence. And Daniel, too, began to weave into those evenings. A history teacher with kind eyes, he brought roasted chicken once, then stayed after to help me clean. He wasn't intimidated by my past, nor awed by the Moreau name. When he learned who my parents were, he didn't treat me like an exotic story. He simply shrugged and said, "You made something else of yourself." That's what matters. It startled me, the way something so simple could feel so radical. For years, every relationship I'd known was weighted with calculation. Who gained status, who lost it. Who advanced the family image, who threatened it. Daniel looked at me and saw not potential profit, not branding, no rebellion, just a woman. Just Elise. One night in December, after walking me home through icy streets lined with holiday lights, he asked quietly if he could kiss me. And when I let him, it was gentle, tentative, unclaimed by obligation or strategy, unconditional. For weeks afterward, my mother's voice haunted me. Who you choose reflects the family. I realized with startling relief that for once, the family I chose to reflect was my own. Meanwhile, the Rose Fellowship had taken on a life I hadn't anticipated. What began as a small scholarship expanded as more people learned of it. A judge who'd admired the Riverview case offered to contribute yearly. An anonymous donor matched the initial seed money. Law firms, even those whose partners I'd once dismissed as cold and calculating, began quietly reaching out. It struck me as deeply ironic. Some who had mocked my path now financially supported those who followed it. That spring, I stood on the stage of a modest community center in Roxbury, speaking to a room of eager law students and their families. The first 5 recipients of the fellowship beamed proudly at my side, their futures less burdened by the weight of debt. "We named this program after Margaret Rose Moreau," I announced, "because she believed in truth, in resilience, in the courage to create new paths. She made sure I could walk mine. Now I get to make sure you can walk yours." Somewhere in that room, I wished my grandmother could have been sitting, pearls at her throat, eyes bright with pride. But then I remembered Margaret Rose had planted the seed so we could bloom without her. Even as my world expanded, Celeste's continued to strain under the Moreau framework. We kept meeting, her eyes shadowed with news she carried in secret. "Father's losing his grip," she admitted once. "The investors are restless. Adrian parrots him at meetings, but the profits show signs of decline. He blames you still, Elise, that without your trust leveraged, things are harder." "I'm not responsible for their greed," I said, though my stomach coiled at the idea of employees paying the price. Her gaze flickered. "He's starting to look old, tired." That startled me. In my memory, my father was immortal, indestructible in polished suits, voice booming. Now he was faltering. Weakness was something he despised, in others and especially in himself. Celeste admitted more that night. "He still uses your name as warning. But sometimes," her voice dropped to a whisper, "sometimes I think he knows he lost." I squeezed her hand. She looked so much like the girl I used to be, trapped still, unable to walk away, but trembling with awareness that chains are not the same thing as love. The next great clash came not at a courtroom table or gala hall, but at Christmas. I hadn't expected to see them. I'd planned to spend the holiday with Jasmine's family, who insisted I join whether or not I brought a dish. Her parents welcomed me like a daughter, stuffing me with food, handing me stockings, making me laugh until my sides ached. But 2 days later, on the 27th of December, Celeste called. "They want to see you," she said nervously. They invited me to deliver the message. "They'll be at the law office tomorrow. They say they want peace. Please come." Against my better judgment, a flicker of curiosity burned. Did peace exist in their vocabulary? The next afternoon, I walked into Caldwell's office again, not as the shaken girl of a year past, not even as the attorney flanked by Susan. I walked in alone, steady, with my grandmother's necklace at my throat. They were waiting. Father, immaculately dressed but looking grayer, thinner. Mother, still poised, though the lines around her eyes had deepened. Celeste sat nearby like a bridge between our worlds. "Elise," my mother began, her tone soft, almost pleading. "This past year has been difficult. We've all said things we regret. But you're still our daughter." I sat, folding my hands. "Am I? Because last I checked, I was ordered out and stripped of everything." "James was angry," she said. "We made mistakes. But the family should forgive." I looked directly at my father. "Do you forgive me, Father? Do you see me, accept me, or only what you want me to be?" His mouth tightened, but his voice emerged lower, older. "You're wasting potential. Throwing your brilliance into scraps. If you had joined Adrian, we would be stronger together. Instead, we fall behind while you waste yourself." There it was. The truth naked. No apology. Not peace. Just the same demand, dressed differently. "I see you're still confusing agreement with love," I said quietly. "I never wasted myself. I just refuse to waste who I am." Silence burned between us. Celeste's hands trembled as she spoke. "Can you not see, Father? She's thriving. She's everything grandmother wanted us to be. Maybe what she's built is stronger than Moreau Holdings. Maybe it's a legacy built on people, not profit." Father's face hardened, but there, a flicker, a fracture. He heard the words, though they burned him. He stood, fury straining the mask. "If you walk away now, Elise, we may never find you again." I rose too, steady as stone. "If you keep seeing me only as a wasted version of yourself, then you never found me to begin with." I turned to Celeste, kissed her cheek. "When you're ready, I'll be here." And then I walked out. That evening, back in my small apartment strung with twinkling lights, I sat at the table surrounded by Jasmine, Daniel, and a dozen friends from the collective. We shared leftovers, played card games, and drank hot cider spiced with cinnamon sticks. At one point, Jasmine's father raised his cup. "Here's to Elise," he said warmly. "The newest member of our family, not by blood, but by choice." The table echoed with cheers. My throat closed with tears I didn't expect. This was what family meant. Not wealth, not power, not conditional acceptance, but presence, laughter, love unmeasured. I realized then that the ache of my parents' rejection would never fully disappear. But it no longer defined me. Their absence had carved space for this new family to enter. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift my grandmother's pearls had ever given me. 1 year. It was 1 full year since I had walked into that ice-laden dining room expecting a toast to my brother's engagement, only to be handed my own exile sentence instead. 12 months since I stood outside the Moreau mansion's locked doors with a useless key in my hand, pearls brushing the skin of my neck, alone but free. Now spring has returned to New England, the air warmer, the streets alive with buds pushing through cracks in stone, and with it, I found myself sitting in the same coffee shop on Chapel Street where George Caldwell once revealed the secret that altered my entire path. I sat at the window, pearls at my neck again, though this time my chest did not clench with fear. Instead, warmth spread slowly through me, deep and steady. In the 12 months since, my life had become something unrecognizable to the girl I used to be. My modest apartment blossomed into a true home, vibrant with friends, laughter, and the smell of fresh basil from the pots on my windowsill. What used to feel like a downgrade now felt luxurious compared to a prison decorated in designer silks. Because this place was mine. Without conditions, work at Haven Legal had accelerated beyond anything I imagined. After the Riverview case, our housing team gained new funding, thanks in part to the media attention. We expanded into 2 more districts, and I was given the incredible honor of leading a small team of attorneys. This time, no one questioned whether my work was real. Judges listened, clients believed, colleagues celebrated. No one asked what my name could do for them because, in this world, my value was measured not by donations or optics, but by real change in people's lives. I often lingered in the collective's waiting room, watching families smile nervously as their names were called, or students scribbling notes as they discussed their cases with us. I would feel it in those moments, the wholeness my parents tried to replace with chandeliers and trophies. This was it. The meaning. The Marrow and the Rose Fellowship. Oh, what it became. The second round of recipients had just been announced. 10 law students across the state, each one of them radiant with potential. There was Angela, whose parents fled gang violence and who now wanted to dedicate her life to asylum defense. There was Marlon, a former foster youth who had survived homelessness but dreamed of building child advocacy reform. As I stood on the stage to announce them, the words caught in my throat. My grandmother's foresight had multiplied into generations, ripples spreading further with every award. When I clasped Angela's hands after presenting her scholarship, she whispered, "You've given me freedom." I thought of Grandma Rose, and my vision blurred. Freedom, that was the word she blessed me with. And in passing it on, I finally understood her legacy fully. At the same time, my personal life, once a barren wasteland of disconnection, flourished. Daniel still made me laugh unexpectedly, still asked permission when his hand brushed mine, still cooked more than me though he burned rice almost every time. He had a way of grounding everything, reminding me that I was not only an attorney or the disowned Moreau, or even a fellowship founder. I was also a woman who liked dancing barefoot to old records, who sometimes overwatered plants, who still cried watching documentaries about whales. One evening, he brought me to his classroom, introduced me to his students. "This," he told them proudly, "is Attorney Moreau. Not the fancy rich kind. She's the kind who makes the law work for everyone." The children clapped, wide-eyed as if I were some folklore hero. My heart nearly split at the simplicity of the moment. To be seen in such honest light, that was love. But perhaps the most unexpected part of the year was Celeste. She had begun to unravel slowly, her mask loosening thread by thread each time we met. Over one dinner, she whispered how she'd been consulting a lawyer, Susan, no less, to ensure her trust, when it arrived at her 25th birthday, remained hers alone. She was building her own lifeline, her first steps out of the Moreau chains, and then, timidly, she confessed something else. "I've started sketching again. Do you remember, Elise? As a kid, Father called it a waste of time, so I shoved it away. But I set up a studio in my apartment. Just small canvases for now, but I feel alive." For the first time, I saw not envy burning in her, but awakening. Celeste might not have been ready to walk away fully, but the spark was there, growing steadily brighter. And my parents? They continued to drift. We never clashed again as we had in George's office, but they lingered like faraway storms, visible on the horizon, but unable to strike me now that I had found shelter. The Gala confrontation had bruised them, I knew. Father returned to his empire, weakened but defiant, whispering that I had betrayed him. My mother continued to obsess over appearances, never admitting the cracks in their carefully curated image. The family business, once untouchable, still wheeled forward, but with undeniable tremors at its foundation. And still they used my name as caution, as weapon, as ghost. But their words no longer reached me. A year of distance had taught me the greatest truth. Rejection only holds the power you give it. And I had stopped giving them mine. On the anniversary of my exile, the very night I was cast out from the Moreau dining room, I decided to honor the day not in mourning, but in celebration. I hosted a dinner party in my apartment, my little place alive with mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors. Jasmine brought wine, Daniel roasted chicken, friends from the collective spilled through the doorway with laughter and casseroles. Celeste even came, slipping in quietly in a simple dress, no designer logo anywhere in sight. She had brought a sketchbook tucked under her arm instead of a handbag, her eyes shining. We sat shoulder to shoulder, eating meals that cost a fraction of a single Moreau bottle of wine but tasted infinitely richer because they were shared. We told stories. We sang songs off-key. We toasted the fact that freedom can look like laughter, that healing can look like cluttered apartments full of warmth. And near the end, I stood glass in hand, my voice trembling but full. 1 year ago, I thought I had lost everything, I began. But tonight, looking around this table, I see I gained more than I could have imagined. I lost parents who saw me as a disappointment, yes, but in their place, I gained family who see me as I am. I lost a mansion's key, but I gained a home with doors always open. I lost an old name, but I gained my truth. And 1 year ago, I thought freedom was just surviving without them. Now I know it's more. Freedom is thriving with people who love you unconditionally. The room clapped, cheered, faces shining with affection I had once believed I would never earn. After everyone left that night and the apartment fell still again, I curled into my couch with Daniel beside me. Outside, the city glowed with winter, lights sparkling against the snow. I touched the pearls at my throat once more, whispering a thank you to Grandma Rose, for seeing me, for protecting me, for leaving me a gift that became not just survival, but a legacy that reached others. Her courage had planted the seed. My courage had carried it forward, and with that I knew. The story was not of losing a family. It was finding one. If you only take one thing away from my journey, let it be this. Sometimes rejection is not the end. Sometimes rejection is simply the doorway to the life you were meant to live. Sometimes the key that no longer fits the lock forces you to find the door where you truly belong. Family, I learned, is not always blood. It is not always legacy. It is who shows up, who stays when things are wrong, who lets you be exactly who you are without trimming your edges down to fit their expectations. And maybe your journey, like mine, will hurt. Maybe you too will have to walk through fire. But the world on the other side can be brighter, freer, and so much fuller than anything you ever imagined. My name is Elise Moreau. And for the first time, no Moreau legacy defines me. I define myself. I am enough. Thank you for listening to the end of my story. If this journey resonated with you, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me, what country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below.